It's a great privilege to introduce Dr. Merlin Burt, who is the chairman of the board of Adventist Heritage Ministries. He is also, of course, the director of the Ellen G. White Estate. And we're extremely grateful for the wonderful blessing that the White Estate is, and as a connection, the Adventist Heritage Ministries. There are a number of properties that Adventist Heritage Ministries manages and cares for. Recently, I was at a property which is managed by the Inter-European Division, Tramelan, in Switzerland. It is actually our first Seventh-day Adventist-owned church. Merlin was informing me a little more that it was actually first built by Sabbatarians, but then they became Seventh-day Adventists. And just a few weeks ago, it was a privilege to be there and to have some services there with our division and with others. We have a number of properties within the United States. There are other properties in other divisions that are being developed as heritage sites. Now you might say, why put money into something that is going to be burned up soon? The Lord is coming. Let's not worry about it. Let's look forward. You know that beautiful quotation, we have nothing to fear for the future except we forget how God has led us and his teaching in our past history. So Adventist Heritage Ministries helps us to remember how God has led us. I give strong support to AHM. And with that, Pastor Burt, Dr. Burt, Pastor Burt, Brother Merlin, come and introduce Markus Kutzschbach, who is essentially the director, the president of this organization. I want you to take very, very special interest in this presentation.
It is such a privilege to be a part of Adventist Heritage Ministries. I'm looking down at one of our members who happens to be the chair of the board for the White Estate, Audrey Anderson, and she tells me repeatedly, this is one board she looks forward to going to. Well, I feel the same way. It is a practical way of actually connecting to God's leading and his working in the past to show how he can work for us today and in the future. And so it is my privilege to introduce Markus Kutzschbach, who has already been mentioned by Elder Wilson. He has been leading this organization for 8 years, and it is such a privilege to work with him. He has Adventist history, Adventist identity, Adventist faith in his blood. And the history especially, you know. You give him an old book, and he will first smell it. Then he'll read it. But God is with us. He has led us in the past, and that tells us that he will lead us in the present, and he is leading us for the future. Please give your attention to this presentation.
Thank you very much. So today I have the joy to share something with you what you might never have heard before. You know about history. You might have read some books of it, but some of you may have never heard about that we have historic sites, not just here in the United States, also around the world. Well, why we do something like this? We call it heritage evangelism. It is a very unique way to approach people. Why is this? We are talking or telling the stories of historic persons who are long gone. So whatever these people believed in, whatever their political views were, whatever they did wrong, whatever they did right, it's history. Nobody feels in any way offended by what they did. That's an environment in which we can also unfold in a natural way in their story our fundamental beliefs. They don't care about if you talk about the seventh-day Sabbath or if you talk about the heavenly sanctuary, the second coming, a great disappointment. They are listening. They are thinking about it, and then they are starting to ask questions. Historic properties are a neutral ground. And there's something else what is involved into that. Let me show that. I have here an old newspaper. This is the real thing. What we use today is this, right? It's a glass. And we take our information from behind the glass. That's how we see the world. This little thing here. This here is the real thing. So if you go to a museum, they are trying to immerse people into the story. Why? Because you have at least 4 senses involved. You can see it. You listen to the story at the same time. You can feel it. And you can smell it, okay? Ugh, okay. That's not a good one. But it will stick with you. In this way, you have an experience which is not just on 2 dimensions. It takes you into the story. If we want to approach our kids, this is something what takes them away from these things. I tell you something. At home, when you come to my apartment, in the hallway, there I have a shelf. And this shelf has LED lights in it. On the shelf, you see books, pottery, some artifacts, and then down here you see stones. So whoever comes to me and wants to go to the dining room, especially on Sabbath, they have to pass this shelf. So they are looking at the shelf, looking at the books, and they are looking at the pottery. I don't know what is about the pottery, but pottery seems to be interesting to people. So they are looking at it, and then I say, yeah, that's original pottery from the Battle Creek Sanitarium. Oh, the Battle Creek Sanitarium. Wow. What is it? Okay, then you fill the whole afternoon in sharing Adventist history. And the kids, there's something very special with the kids. They are going on this level. And there are the stones. Looking. What is this? And then I can tell them. I have a stone. It's not mine, it's Dr. Bird's stone, but I have a similar, the same one. It's from the Dime Tabernacle. So I can tell them the story of the Dime Tabernacle. I have one of Joseph Bates' chimney as we restored it. So I can tell them the story. And you know what happens? These kids, and you have their attention at least for an hour or longer. Stories is what the kids attract. If you tell them stories, they forget about this. Well, Merlin, maybe you bring this stone here. There's a very special stone. I guess nobody of you wants to have this one, right? It doesn't work. It's dead. It's just 140 years old. But here's a stone which is about 2,600 years old. It has the name on it of Nebuchadnezzar. How many of you would like to have a stone like this? Can I see? Oh man, what's wrong with you? Why you are interested in stones? There is something with the real history. That brings the book of Daniel alive. That was around when Daniel passed by and his friends, and Nebuchadnezzar as well. That is a witness of the past. Well, I want to take you, or just think with you a little bit about Joshua chapter 4. Do you remember the story of Joshua chapter 4? This is when the Israelites came out of the desert, finally now entering the promised land, right? Time after 40 years. But there's a river in the way. And God acted. He cut the water off. And they walked through the river on what? On dry ground. Right. After they passed and they reached the other side, God had told Joshua to do something. Can you remember? Thank you. Exactly. He said, take 12 stones from the place where the priest's feet stood firm to build a monument. For what? That this may be a sign among you. Right? Well, let's go to the biblical text here. What does it say? Why he did it? And that was not an idea by Joshua. It was instructed by the Lord. And he said, when your children ask you in time to come, what do these stones mean to you? Then tell them, what? The mighty acts of God. He delivered you. He prepared the way. He loves you. He is your rescue. As long as you stay faithful with the Lord, you don't need to worry about your future. Well, in the Bible, if something is important, what happens? They didn't have these markers. They couldn't print it bold. They repeated it. Now look at this, verse 21. It seems to be important to have these stones around. Again, Joshua says, when your children ask their fathers, whom? Their fathers, in time to come, saying, what are these stones? Then you shall inform the children about the mighty acts of God. Don't forget the mighty acts of God. So the monument he set up became a reminder for the future generations to keep the story of the mighty acts of God alive. And in verse 24 we read, he did it that all the people of the earth, who is all? The believers and the Gentiles, the unbelievers, all the people of the earth may know that the hand of the Lord is mighty, so that you may fear the Lord your God forever. Brethren, sisters, don't forget the mighty acts of God in your own life. And don't forget them as leaders in your territory, how God established the work. It is important. Well, God knew that we are forgetting fast. I don't know about you, but if something good happens in my life, it fades out fast. If you hurt me with something, it might stick a little longer. So from generation to generation, these stories should be told. And if the parents will forget about it, there are these stones. And the kids will see the stones. And because they are curious, they will ask the parents what these stones still mean. And even if the parents will not believe into that, they know the story, and they will tell the story to their kids. And in this way, these stones, verse 7, shall be the people for the people of Israel as a memorial forever. Now, what about us? More than 3,000 years after these events took place, do we need reminders? Are we in the same danger to forget? Well, let's take a look if the spirit of prophecy and the pioneers would have something to say about it. Unfortunately, we don't have the time to look at the pioneers, but I have 4 quotes from Ellen White. Please read it together with me. The first one says, "The past history of the cause of God needs to be brought before our people, young and old, that they may be familiar with it. How frequently were the waymarks set up by the Lord in dealing with ancient Israel, lest they should forget the history of their past." Second one. Now listen to this. There is a work of sacred importance for ministers and people to do. What is the work of sacred importance? 4 points. First, ministers and people are to study the history of the cause and people of God. Second, ministers and people are not to forget the past dealing of God with his people. They are to revive and recount the truths that have come to seem of little value to those who do not know by personal experience of the power and the brightness that accompanied them when they were first seen and understood. In all their original freshness and power, these truths are to be given to the world. What is Ellen White doing here? She is linking a successful, powerful mission with a solid knowledge of our history. The experience of William Miller and his associates, of Captain Joseph Bates, and of other pioneers of the Advent message should be kept before our people. And then she writes in her diary, "Oh, where as a people are our commemorative stones? Where are set up our monumental pillars, carved with letters expressing the precious story of what God has done for us in our experience?" Well, I'm glad to tell you today, here are some of them. We have a monument for the second coming at the William Miller Farm. We have a monument for the Heavenly Sanctuary at the Hiram Edson Farm. We have also a sanctuary for the We have a stone of remembrance for the seventh-day Sabbath and the three angels' message and the Joseph Bates Boyhood Home. And in Battle Creek, there's the house of Ellen and James White. There is a memory for the spirit of prophecy. And the village in Battle Creek has a lot of potential because it tells the establishment of what you are doing today. Most of your departments have their origin in Battle Creek. Now I want to take you to the first of them. But before I go there, what is very interesting to me, these sites going well along with the great controversy. Chapter 18 to 22 covers the Millerite movement, followed by chapter 23 and 24 covering the heavenly sanctuary, followed by chapter 25 and 26 covering the seventh-day Sabbath and the establishment of the three angels' messages. When we go to the William Miller Farm, Ellen White says, the doctrine of the second advent is the very keynote of the sacred scriptures. 1984, we had the possibility to buy this property. That's how it looked like. But it was still there. There was a lot of work to do. It took us 10 years to restore the William Miller Farm to what it is today. We not just did the outside, the exterior, and we have to continue with the landscaping to turn it into a farm. We also did 2 rooms so far on the inside. This is William Miller's study. This is the place where he found his friend Jesus. This is the place where he discovered in Daniel 8:14 that Jesus will come, about what he thought, the spring of 1843 and the spring of 1844. This is the place where the great disappointment took place. This is the place where the Bible became his delight. Thousands of people are coming every year, not just Adventists. We have about 20% of the people who are non-Adventists who are coming because they are interested in the story of a historic person and the influence he had at his time. Even on the left side, the descendants of William Miller are coming and giving us artifacts. They did that through the last decades and equipped the house with original artifacts. And some of them are Seventh-day Adventists. And you see our young people on Ascension Rock. And the kids, they love to explore the William Miller farm. I wish we could do a little more to attract it more for the kids. And the young people, they like to camp, right? You see our fire pit, this is our campground. Just want to show you what we are trying to do. We are in the beginning in a planning phase for the William Miller farm. Look at this. This is our property. The yellow lines mark the area where the historic farm is today. And the red lines, it's our backyard. We are talking about 170 acres. I'm wondering what will happen if we place a Millerite campground or early Adventist campground into the backyard, where the kids can come, the Pathfinder groups, to stay there for a couple of days, studying their Bible in the big tent, having activities in the woods, learning about the beginnings of our church's movement on the historic part. And what about if we build a visitor center, a welcome center, which will tell the story in an immersive way? Again, there are coming many non-Adventists. It would be more attractive also for them to come. I want to show you, these are preliminary ideas, what we could do. I just want to share it with you.
A new visitor center for the William Miller Farm will allow large groups to have a state-of-the-art, immersive experience into the life and work of William Miller. The spacious reception facilitates the visit for large bus tours. The journey starts with lively displays featuring William Miller's experience as a captain during the War of 1812. The historical setting is established with the aid of interactive displays and period artifacts. Miller's providential deliverance from cannon fire and death becomes the emotional and spiritual starting point of his life's journey. Further on, Miller's family life and upbringing is explored, painting a more comprehensive picture of who he was and the influences that molded him. His early views on religion and spirituality are discussed, setting the stage for his conversion story to be told.
As the visitor advances on, Miller's conversion and newfound love for Jesus take center stage. His biblical prophetic discoveries are explained through interactive displays and original artifacts. His drive for sharing the good news becomes evident as the visitor exits a more compressed exhibit hall into an airy and lofty central atrium where the Millerite movement is discussed. A central tent, mimicking a Millerite big tent, allows the visitor to be included in the story as a feature video presentation of end-time events and prophecies related to the Millerite movement is projected upon the surfaces of the tent in a 360-degree immersive video show.
The visitor feels invested in the narrative, and upon exiting the tent, they are invited to walk up a ramp that circles the main tent. Vignettes telling the stories of individual Millerites guide the ascent into a second-story exhibit space. As visitors go up, a feeling of hope is mirrored into the narrative, expectations build, and a sense of liberation is evoked. The hopeful ascent culminates in a bright and glorious display referencing the return of Christ in the clouds. The exhibit compels the visitor to look up and contemplate in awe, mirroring once more the emotional state of the Millerite movement prior to October 22, 1844.
The next display contrasts this emotional climax as the great disappointment is explained. The visitor is compelled to walk into a darker and more somber space where the passage of time is highlighted. As the clock hits midnight, the visitor feels the deep anguish Millerites felt on that fateful day.
Finally, the visitor arrives at a larger space that is dimly lit with a starry sky. A period Bible is the only element in the large room open to Christ's Great Commission. Miller's words are highlighted on the wall as the visitor is invited to stop and reflect on the journey and process the emotions felt by these pioneers. As the visitor descends a ramp, they are once more confronted with the Millerite tent as they are invited to reflect on the significance of the journey. Displays will summarize how a message of hope dawns for Adventists through Edson's understanding of the sanctuary, and the visitor is therefore invited to visit the Edson farm to further explore how the story continues.
Upon exiting the main exhibit space, the visitor ends up in the Heritage Shop, where books and products are available for sale. The space is built to reference the early camp meeting setting. The visitor has reached the reception area once more, where they are invited to walk towards Miller's original house, to tour the home and learn more.
Sorry, it's a long video, but it is a long story as well. I'm looking forward when the tent is pitched to have the annual council on the William Miller farm. When we leave the William Miller farm, we leave with a question, right? It's the question about why Jesus didn't come. So Ellen White says, "But the appointed time had passed and the Lord not appeared. The believers knew that God's word could not fail. Their interpretation of the prophecy must be at fault. But where was the mistake?" And that brings us to the Hiram Edson farm. October 23, 1844, and the weeks after, Hiram Edson, Grocer, and Dr. Hahn studied the Bible and found the answer. So in 1989, we were able to purchase this property as well. It looked like this. Again, it took a couple of years to refresh the area, bring in a new building and a facility, and we also could acquire the original barn of Hiram Edson's father. It's staying today at the Hiram Edson farm, and it's reaching out. We have a lot of visitors. The visitor center is too small, so we're using the barn to tell the story, and even choirs are coming around to take their recordings there because it's an interesting area. I want to show you a little bit more. Look at this. There's the Hiram Edson farm. About 7 miles north of us is the birthplace of the modern spiritualism that happened on March 31, 1848. And about 3 miles to the west is the famous hill Cumorah. Do you know what that is? On September 22, 1823, the story goes, young Joseph Smith found the golden plates with the Book of Mormon. They have about 100,000 visitors per year. I'm wondering what we could do to uplift the heavenly sanctuary, this doctrine, for us, for our kids, as well for the many visitors who would come. What about if we build a visitor center, place a 1-by-1 scale sanctuary of the wilderness in it, let our kids come experiencing the sanctuary, learning in an immersive way the sanctuary message, and link it to the heavenly sanctuary. I tell you something, if we build something like this, not just Adventists or the people in the vicinity, there's the interstate passing by, if we put signs up for curiosity, the people would come. And in explaining the biblical model, we would link to the heavenly sanctuary. Well, this brings us to the third site. This is in Fairhaven. It is the boyhood home of a, I would say, forgotten pioneer. Joseph Bates, Captain Joseph Bates. How many of you know Captain Joseph Bates? Can I see your hands? Oh, good. Well, there are still some who might never heard about him. This man is crucial to the beginnings of our church. He is well known as the apostle of the Sabbath. He was the first man who published tracts and wrote about this truth. He was the man who went out to find the disappointed Millerites and tell them why Jesus didn't came. He traveled hundreds and thousands of miles to find these people in the wintertime, in the summertime, and he had no income after 1844. In 1844, he sold his house to pay off all his debts, to owe nobody anything when Jesus is coming. And he gave the money to further the work to proclaim the soon second coming. He had a family. It's a so powerful story. Some of you were there with us in 2017. Are there some here who have seen the house in 2017? Okay, I will show you a little update about the Joseph Bates house.
We did not miss this opportunity. It is not every day that an original house central to our history becomes available for purchase. Some may think of HM as mainly concerned with the past, but by purchasing this property 20 years ago, the vision of HM was for the future. Our goal has never been to simply restore old homes. If our properties are to become memorials to teach our pillars of faith to the next generation, they must be living memorials. These houses are tools to keep the story alive, to imprint our values upon our children. So when the boyhood home of Joseph Bates, which is nestled in the heart of Fairhaven, Massachusetts, came onto the market, HM understood the importance of transforming this unassuming property into a bastion of truth. During the first years, we maintained the property and welcomed guests to tour the house as it stood. But we knew that to create an immersive environment that could transport the visitor to the time when Bates' story took place, the property would need substantial investments. And thus, starting in 2017, we had a bold plan in action. At first, it seemed an impossible dream. To peel back the layers of time and restore the house to its former appearance would really take considerable resources. In the meantime, we weren't the only people excited about restoring this house. The local community was looking forward to seeing it transformed to become a stop among other sites of historical importance.
I'm Chris Richard. I'm the tourism director for the town of Fairhaven. When the Darden family first put the Bates house up for sale, my first thought was that the Adventist Heritage Ministry should be the owners of this house, probably the oldest house standing in the town of Fairhaven. And Joseph Bates is a key person in our town's history. I was so happy when it was purchased and thought that the restoration and opening it to the public would tie in so nicely with the rest of the history of the area.
They understood the relevance of Joseph Bates. It was up to us to continue making his story memorable to the new generation. Another gift happened to be sitting right beside the house, the oldest remaining structure in the area.
So this is a fireplace. It was the wall of a house, which was built about 1678 by Thomas Tabor, who was a son-in-law of the Pilgrim John Cook. I'm sure that he sat right in front of this fireplace, one of the original pilgrims, beginning of American history, right next to the beginning of your church's history.
This site has the ability to attract visitors even beyond our faith community. But to make this place truly immersive, we had to go beyond restoring the home. We needed to craft an experience that would fully engage visitors into the story. So we carefully planned exhibit spaces that made the story come alive. We also needed to add a welcome center to accommodate larger groups of people prior to entering the smaller historic home. Because of its condition, the existing carriage house could not serve this purpose and had to be replaced with a new structure. And a place for volunteers to stay was also needed. Through human eyes, this seemed too ambitious of a plan. Yet, inspired by Joseph Bates' life, we moved forward with the construction plans, fully relying on God's providence to see the project completed. And God did it again, in the same way that he provided when Joseph Bates was in a desperate financial situation, sending him money to sustain his family and to start publication of a pamphlet about the seventh-day Sabbath. We received the resources to restore the home, to continue heralding the importance of the seventh-day Sabbath for our modern world. From dust, studs, and cracked plaster, the space slowly started to regain form. In addition to the financial gifts, God also provided the people who were able to realize the plans. Bob Bergerson, a gifted woodworker, showed up at the right time to take this project on. It took him a couple of months, and with the help of Jefferson Rodriguez and his graphics team, the dream is materializing. A fully immersive 360-degree boat room serves as the main storytelling device that will deeply impact visitors of all ages, so they become excited about Joseph Bates and his legacy. 20 years ago, we did not miss the opportunity to purchase the property. Now, we must not miss the opportunity to finish the project and tell the story, the exciting story of Joseph Bates' life and his dedication to share the second coming of Christ, to proclaim the three angels' message, and to uplift the seventh-day Sabbath. Well, here's the good news. We are almost there.
I want to thank all of you who supported this project. I told you in 2017 that this site will be the main attraction for 2020, which was the 400th anniversary of the landing of the Mayflower. As we were on the way to finish this, to make it happen, COVID hit the road and the whole thing went down. The town was sorry for that, but the town are happy that we restored the house. We had to stop on the project for 3 years because of COVID, but now we are back on track. And maybe for another annual council, I would love to have you in a boat room to experience and going with Joseph Bates on one of the journeys and learn how he found the Sabbath. Today, after we did the first things in 2019, the people show up. They like to see it, and they can't wait to see the museum finished. And Yeah, soon, very soon. Okay, the last one for today is in Battle Creek, the house of James and Ellen White. It talks about the spirit of prophecy. That was completely finished, the renovation in 1999-2000. Also inside, everything set back to the time when Ellen White lived there. I tell you, it's a magnet. People are coming. I wish I could tell you these stories, show you the pictures, but I can't because of privacy issues. Anyway, the village itself has huge potential. It will talk about your own history here. It's about education, religious liberty, the health message, whatever, publishing ministry, worldwide mission, and many more. We don't have time to talk about this today, just some impressions about what happens when our young people are coming. They are flooding the place and spending a day listening to the stories of the old times, of the mighty acts of God in establishing this work. And they are listening. If you go to the Kellogg Center, you see they want to try these machines, and they are still working today. And then something what just happened about 2.5 weeks ago. Filmmaker Martin Plancard came to the village to shoot a documentary about the odyssey of vegetarians, from saving the soul to saving the planet. They wanted to film on the original place where things happened. He was in Asia and all kinds of places around the world. But Battle Creek takes about 15 minutes in this documentary. Dr. Brian C. Wilson gave the interview. He wrote a book about Kellogg. And they wanted to know what was the influence of Ellen White on John Harvey Kellogg. I told you, these sites are neutral grounds. They set up their set in the bedroom of Ellen White and interviewed Professor Wilson, and then in the Discovery Center. And this is just one I can share with you. You will see this movie going on Arte in Europe next year. 15 minutes featuring the story of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, at least part of it. Well, I wish I could tell you a little bit about my story, but there's no time, and I want to stick with the time. For me, I wouldn't be here today without our history, the history of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. It is so powerful that it changed my life. All what I can tell you is the great controversy, reading this book, saved me and pointed me to the Bible. They won't eat. They want to eat. Okay, very quickly. I grew up in East Germany under the socialists or communists, however you call them. As the wall came down, I was 14 years of age in 1989. As they asked me, and I can't tell you now why, but it has reason I can understand, what the church did in East Germany to survive, but what I knew about Adventism, and they asked me in school, what's the difference between a Protestant and a Seventh-day Adventist? Now that would be an invitation, right? I told them what I knew. Well, we don't drink alcohol, we don't eat pork. We go to church on Sabbath, and we don't baptize kids. That's the difference. That's all what I knew. As the wall came down with all the education I got in school, and now you are free to go your own ways. Chaos in schools, because from one day to another day, everything what they told us was wrong, and now something else was right. Teachers didn't know what to do. You can imagine what that means to somebody who is 14 years of age. We do what we want. And I had a couple of very bad situations in my life which turned me to the opposite thing, from the communists to the other end of the pendulum. I lost my school education. It's just a dark chapter in my life. Church didn't interest me in any way. There was nothing what the church gave me to stick with the church. Nothing. But I knew one thing. I don't drink alcohol. I don't eat pork. And I always had a problem on Sabbath to do something. Well, in these dark times, bad times for my parents, didn't know what to do with me. One day, on the desk of my mother, I found this book. It has the German title, the Germans will recognize it. Der große Kampf. We were a little bit more acquainted with another book, which was called Mein Kampf. So the title attracted my attention. I opened the book and looked into it. Whoa, history, look at this. I was always interested in history, so I took the book. And in the following month, at this time, I had no idea who Ellen G. White was. I never heard about it. I don't know what would happen if I had known. I don't know. So I read the book. I couldn't believe what I read. There were the reformers, people who stood to their conviction, who were not willing to compromise. They loved God so much that they rather died than to give up on him or not being faithful to God. That struck my heart. And then we came to the chapters about William Miller. Never in my life heard about the William Miller. What in the world is a Millerite movement? What in the world is the second coming of Christ on October 22, 1844? A great disappointment. Didn't know anything about it. This book brought me back to read the Bible, and I was looking for people to study it with me. I went back to church, and I don't want to blame anybody. Don't take me wrong here. It's not what I want to do. I joined the Sabbath school. In my enthusiasm about what I found in the book, I quoted Ellen White. The church was not happy with me, and they told me I should never do it again. I was disappointed. Can you imagine what that means for somebody? So I went out of the church. There was the name Seventh-day Adventist Church. So I looked at it and I said, this is not what the book is talking about. I need to look for something else. 3 weeks later, I found this book on the desk of my mother. It has the title in English. Let me see here. I always forget it. Stories of My Grandmother from Ella M. Robinson. I read this book in one day. What I read in this book started the Advent fire in me. I wanted to follow the sacrificing commitment of these people to proclaim this message to a dying world. I tell you, this book brought me back to the Bible. This book brought me back to the church. Our history matters. If you tell the kids the stories of our beginnings, it will stick with them. One last thing. 2 years ago, I was with my dear colleagues, where's Michael and Daryl Thompson? Where's Michael Sokupa? So here somewhere? In the back, here. And we were about 16 hours away from here by plane on a Sabbath, and I had the privilege in a church to talk about the HM. The church was full. The first 2 rows were dedicated to kids. And I was talking about something like that. After the presentation, we opened for questions. And there in the second row, this little hand came up. And I think, what is this? And the little girl asked me, who will tell us the stories about Joseph Bates you mentioned, or Ellen White? Who can tell us these stories? Are there any books we can read? It struck my heart. I want to encourage you, if you don't have these historic sites, and even if you have them, make sure that the stories of our pioneers, these kids' books, are available to our children. It will change your church. If they are familiar with these stories, you will see the next generation finishing this work. Thank you so much for listening. I'm looking forward to seeing you on one of the sites. May God bless you in your work.
Thank you very much.
That's why he needed to tell you an extra 5 minutes. These stories, this history, can change your life because God is in it. I hope each of the divisions will renew their interest in historic properties. Don't spend exorbitant amounts of money, but do something. And I want to thank the divisions for the tremendous help you provided a few years ago for the Joseph Bates home. And I hope you will visit it one of these days and see the renewed focus. And God bless each one of you, and remember Adventist Heritage Ministries. It is part of our entire global total member involvement, helping people to remember how God has led us and how he will lead us in the future.